Thank you very much indeed. I'm not quite sure how long I'm going to be this afternoon, because the subject could be half a day or it could be 5 minutes. 5 minutes because talking about intimacy with God in public is about as easy or as difficult as talking about other kinds of intimacy in public. Half a day or more, or half a lifetime, because you never quite run out of things to say. But what I'd really want to do in the time available this afternoon is to try and think with you a little bit about why it is and how it is that people wanting to talk about God have turned to the language of human intimacy and human love, and what they think they've been doing, and what effect that has both ways, both on what we say about human love and what we say about God. It seems to me that people begin this process when they ask the question, what kind of change does God bring to human lives? And you cast around to try and find something that feels a little bit like that level of change. You cast around in the whole range of human experience and say, well, what is it that makes that sort of difference, that much difference? And it doesn't take long for people to come to the conclusion that one of the experiences that most obviously makes that level of difference is the experience of being humanly in love. It goes back a long way, because it's in the first century of the Christian era, it's in Jesus' lifetime probably, that people are having debates about whether you put the Song of Songs into Holy Scripture. Because the Song of Songs is a very highly charged erotic poem. It's full of the kind of thing which even the most liberated cleric on a Sunday morning reading from the Song of Songs might just want to blush and cough over a little bit. It's about passion and yearning, about a hunger for another person. A hunger that's expressed with a real nakedness, real rawness, that still makes it extraordinarily powerful reading. And it got into the Bible because people were able to say, Jews first and then Christians, well, it's about the sort of experience that is at least a bit like being intimate with God. It's about the kind of experience that makes that kind of difference. And people commenting on this, Jews and Christians throughout the centuries, were very conscious of the fact that all this was quite ambiguous stuff, quite explosive stuff. That eros, erotic passion, yearning, longing for another person, wasn't exactly a tame tiger, as they say. And once let out, it was rather difficult to get back in. All the same, they took the risk.
Good evening, Rowan. It's the 6th of January 2016 and it's just after midnight, and I'm going to be talking this evening about a talk that you gave at the Greenbelt Festival in August 2002, and the title of the talk is Kiss and Tell, and you're talking about, well, you're supposed to be talking about Christian mysticism. There is a subtitle that makes that a bit clearer. In fact, you only talk about one Christian mystic, who is St. John of the Cross, and this is part of the reason why I'm going to be making some comments about this particular talk before I go on to talk about your truly out-of-this-world article in the New Statesman. So, first of all, I want to talk about the Greenbelt Festival, which is an open-air festival that occurs every year in August and is primarily aimed at young people, at young Christians. So you're really giving this talk for young people. So I just want to make some quotations about a work of St. John of the Cross that you don't refer to, but it does relate particularly to young people, so it might have been helpful if you'd spoken about this, but when I make the quotations from it, it will become evident why you didn't mention this. So I'm reading now from his commentary on stanza 30 of the Spiritual Canticle. This is stanza 30, I'll just read it out first in English. With flowers and emeralds chosen on cool mornings, we shall weave garlands flowering in your love and bound with one hair of mine. So I'm reading from the introduction to the commentary on stanza 30 now, and it will become evident later on why I've just quoted this one line from this. So it's talking about inner exchanges between God and the soul, and this is what St. John of the Cross says. These interior exchanges between God and the soul bear such delicate and sublime delight that no mortal tongue can describe it or human intellect understand it. And the point I'm making here, because you do quote from one of St. John of the Cross's poems and you kind of big up the erotic aspect of it, without really talking about the underlying spiritual formation and journey, which you did also. I mean, you not exactly the same, but with Teresa of Avila you gave a very superficial talk about her, and the comments that you make about these things are very superficial. As I've said before, you only skim the surface and pick out the points that you want to emphasise, and you miss the underlying assumptions, really, on purpose, in my opinion, as I will explain when I've just quoted from his commentary on this stanza. So I'm going to read his commentary about the first two lines of this stanza, which are with flowers and emeralds chosen on cool mornings. So this is what he says. This is stanza 30, commentary, part 2. I'll just say that the bride represents the soul and the bridegroom represents Christ. So this is what he says. In this stanza, the bride returns to address the bridegroom in the communion and refreshment of love. She describes the solace and fruition the bride soul and the Son of God possess in the wealth of virtues and gifts of each other, and in the interchange of these treasures that they enjoy mutually in the communion of love. In speaking to him, therefore, she asserts that they will weave rich garlands of gifts and virtues, acquired and gained at a pleasant and suitable time, made beautiful and attractive in the love he bears for her, and sustained and preserved through her love for him. She calls this enjoyment of the virtues a weaving of garlands from them, for both the bride and the bridegroom enjoy them together in their love for each other, as though these virtues were flowers twisted into garlands, with flowers and emeralds. This is part 3 now. The flowers are the soul's virtues, and the emeralds are the gifts received from God. These flowers and emeralds are chosen on cool mornings. So that's with flowers and emeralds, the flowers being virtues and the emeralds gifts received from God, and these flowers and emeralds are chosen on cool mornings. Part 4. This means they are acquired at the time of youth, which is life's cool morning. She points out that they are chosen because she obtained them during her youth, when the vices put up more strenuous opposition and nature is more inclined and ready to lose them. Also, by beginning to gather the virtues at this early season, she acquired more perfect and choice ones. She terms this time of youth cool mornings, for just as fresh spring mornings are more pleasant than other times of day. He's writing in Spain, remember, where it does get like furnace hot in the middle of Spain, particularly in the summer. So you can actually only go out and do work in gardens and fields and so on in cool mornings at this time of day. So that's the context of cool mornings. That's why it's the most pleasant time of day. For just as fresh spring mornings are more pleasant than other times of day, so too the virtues of youth please God more. And these cool mornings can even refer to the acts of love by which the virtues are acquired. These acts of love give more pleasure to God than do cool mornings to the children of the earth. So that's what he has to say about this stanza of his spiritual canticle, which is one of his best poems, along with Dark Night, which is the poem that you quote from. And as we can say, he's emphasising that this union with God and this enjoyment of close communion with God and the receiving of gifts from God is intrinsically bound up with virtue and the cultivation of virtue, which of course you don't mention. So I'm now going to go on to say some of the things that you did mention about St John of the Cross. You could have mentioned this thing, which would have been highly relevant to young people. You probably didn't even know about it because you research things very superficially. But even if you did know about it, why ignore something that would be so appropriate to talk to a group of young people? Because you always evade reference to virtue, don't you? You never mention it, and even when you do mention it, you dismiss it, which you actually do dismiss morality later on in this lecture, and I'll play a clip of that. But anyway, moving on to what you say about one of St John of the Cross's other poems, Dark Night, which you say, you call it Songs of the Soul. You say that this is the title of the poem. It's more usually referred to in English as Dark Night, so that people will know that this is the poem that has been referred to. But actually the title of the poem, and I'm reading this directly from Spanish now, Songs of the Soul, that rejoices in having arrived at the high state of perfection, that is union with God, by the way of spiritual negation. So you call it Songs of the Soul and miss out the point that the soul has arrived at a high state of perfection. This is what you're communicating to these people, so you chop off the first part of the title to avoid any reference to virtue, don't you? So anyway, this is what you say the poem says. Now, before I start on this, I want to say that my thesis was about St John of the Cross, and a significant part of the thesis, I was talking about the reception of the works of St John of the Cross into English, because there is quite a difference between the way that St John of the Cross is understood in the Spanish-speaking world and the way that he's understood in the English-speaking world, which was relevant to the main theme of my thesis. So I did spend quite some time researching the reception into English of the works of St John of the Cross, and I have to say I've never come across this rendition of the poem that you give, the poem Dark Night, and it's my suspicion that it isn't a translation, that it's a rendition that you've adapted from other English translations. I don't know that for certain, but I'm suspecting that that's the case. So this is what you say. You say this is the poem. On a dark night, all my anxieties inflamed by love. What a brave adventure this was. With nobody in sight, I slunk out of the house, with everybody else asleep. Right, well, I'm going to read a translation by Rodriguez and Kavanagh, which is an American translation. So this is the same stanza. One dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, are the sheer grace, I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. So, what a brave adventure this was. I don't know how you could get that from any other English translation, really. Oh, venture of delight, Campbell puts it, but he's doing a poetic translation. It's not a direct translation, he's making it a poem in English, but he still doesn't misrepresent it the way that you have. What a brave adventure this was. In Spanish, that's O dichosa ventura, which means oh happy chance, or something like that. It's an exclamation. Rodriguez and Kavanagh have put out the sheer grace, which is an interpretation, in my opinion, which is spiritualised it a bit more in English. But what a brave adventure this was. I just think that's quite a bizarre rendition, to be honest. With nobody in sight, I slunk out of the house. So, I went out unseen. There isn't actually anything about anybody else being present in this stanza, with nobody in sight. I slunk out of the house. I went out unseen. Salí sin ser notada. I went out without being noticed. So there's no slinking going on at all. It makes it sound a bit shady, really, doesn't it? If you say I slunk out of the house. And then the last line you've said, with everybody else asleep. So this other translation is, my house being now all stilled, which in Spanish is, estando ya mi casa sosegada, which means more or less the same thing. But again, there's no reference to anybody else, and really the house is, he's using to represent the soul. The things that are asleep are his cares and vices and things. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. There is nobody else. This is about the soul in communion with God. Other people are irrelevant. So everybody else asleep is just complete nonsense. So you go on to say, safely in disguise, up the secret stairs I crept. What a brave adventure this was. No other eyes to see me, and everyone else in the house asleep. So that's stanza 2. So here it is, this other translation. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder disguised, are the sheer grace. In darkness and concealment, my house being now all stilled. So there isn't anyone else in this stanza either, no other eyes to see me, and everyone else in the house asleep. And we've got what a brave adventure this was again. Up the secret stairs I crept. Well, you're making it sound like you're going into someone's bedroom there, aren't you? Which isn't what it says. By the secret ladder disguise. Sometimes people put stair. By the secret stair. Por la secreta escala disfrazada. So, you're making it sound a bit seedy, aren't you, that you're sneaking up somebody's bedroom stairs. So you go on. And on that lucky night, so that's on that glad night in this other translation, en la noche dichosa. So you could say lucky night, really. Happy night. On that happy night, or lucky night, you could say that. In secret with nobody to see me. It does actually say that. Off I went, nobody watching. Nobody saw me, it says. in English. That's what the Spanish means as well. Nadie me vea. No other light except the light in my heart. So the stanza in English is, on that glad night, in secret for no one saw me, nor did I look at anything. You've missed that out. With no other light or guide than the one that burns in my heart. And you go on. And that was the one that led me through, more clearly than the light of noonday, to where somebody was waiting for me, somebody I knew very well, where I expected no one else to be. So that's not really too bad a translation, except the last line where you've said where I expected no one else to be. The other translation I've got here in English, they're in a place where no one appeared. The Spanish is en parte donde nadie parecía. And I'm going to talk a bit more about this line, because I did talk when I was talking about your strange lecture at St Paul's Cathedral, where you said that being honest about your failings was important, and you never are. That there was a theme in 16th century Spanish literature, which is when this was written, the theme of the contrast between being and appearing, ser and parecer. So we have this verb here, parecer, at the end of it, en parte donde nadie parecía, in a place where no one else appeared. So if we understood this in the context of 16th century Spanish literature, where there's this prominent theme of the contrast between being and appearing, then we don't have to understand it only in the sense that it's a place where no one else appeared, in the sense that no one else showed up or no one else was there. It can be interpreted in a place where no one seemed. So it's a place where you can only be, you cannot seem. So the point I'm making with this is that if you want intimacy with God, which you talk about a lot in this lecture, then it's important to be authentic and not to seem, if you see what I mean. Appearing to be honest, or appearing like a contemplative, or appearing like a Christian, or appearing like a moral person. These things don't bring a person any closer to God, and this is the contrast between being and appearing, ser and parecer. So in this stanza 4 here, this guided me. I'm reading this other translation now, not the rendition that you gave. This guided me. This is the light in his heart he's talking about. This guided me more surely than the light of noon, to where he was waiting for me. Him I knew so well, there in a place where no one appeared, en parte donde nadie parecía. So he comes and he finally meets with God, the beloved, and in this place no one appears. It doesn't say no one else appears. No one appears. Parecía, parecer, it, like in English, appear and seem. It can be used in both ways. So it can be understood in this way, that you can't get there by seeming. You can only get there by being. And whether or not this is what he intended, it is the truth anyway. You cannot approach God by seeming anything. So seeming holy, seeming prayerful, seeming honest, you can't draw near to God by seeming these things. You have to be. So that's my point about ser and parecía, which I brought up the other day, and is illustrated in this stanza of the poem. So you only quote the first four stanzas of this rendition that you've given, which I would say, I strongly suspect you've thrown it together yourself from other English translations, because it's the way you wanted to present it, because you've cut off as well part of the title. You've just called it Songs of the Soul and not mentioned that it's Songs of the Soul that's already reached a state of perfection in virtue, a degree of it anyway, a high state of perfection, in order to enjoy this intimate communion with God. You chopped that off and you've given a rendition of this poem that makes it sound like he's creeping up into somebody's bedroom, up secret staircases. So you go on, you finish there, and you go on to say, it's strong stuff, and as I say, if you didn't have a few pious capital letters there, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was about somebody simply slipping out in the middle of the night for an assignation or about God. Well, that isn't true, is it? If you read the title out, you'd easily be able to tell. So I'm going to play the clip where you read this out, because you do sound quite bizarre when you're talking about this thing anyway. And then I'm going to come on to say a bit more about this talk later on, although I might divide it into two videos, because even though I'm not quoting the whole talk or dealing with it, it's so bizarre and disturbed what you say, really, and misrepresenting him and misrepresenting Christian mysticism in general, that I want to say some more about it, a bit like I did about the talk about Teresa of Avila, although I'm not going to go over it in such detail, but I just wanted to make this point before I talk about what you wrote in the New Statesman, because you've got a very seedy slant on things, let's put it that way. So I'll just leave that there for now.
Pick up one of the poems of St. John of the Cross from the 16th century, and you can read the whole of the, 7, the whole of the 8 stanzas of this particular poem, the Song of the Soul, without actually having a clue that it's about God. On a dark night, all my anxieties inflamed by love. What a brave adventure this was. With nobody in sight, I slunk out of the house, with everybody else asleep. Safely in disguise. Up the secret stairs I crept. What a brave adventure this was. No other eyes to see me, and everyone else in the house asleep. And on that lucky night, in secret, with nobody to see me, off I went, nobody watching. No other light except the light in my heart. And that was the one that led me through, more clearly than the light of noonday, to where somebody was waiting for me, somebody I knew very well, where I expected no one else to be. It's strong stuff, and as I say, if you didn't have a few helpful, pious capital letters there, you wouldn't be able to tell whether it was about somebody simply slipping out in the middle of the night for an assignation, or about God. Intimacy with God, of the kind that some of these saints I've been talking about want us to reflect on. Intimacy with God becomes not a kind of individual luxury for pious people. It becomes one of the deeply hidden but absolutely necessary springs of real humanity. We should, I think, step back from any suggestion that religious talk simply solves intellectual problems. Step back from any talk about how religion reinforces our morality. It may be true. Religious language does solve some problems. Religious belief does, emphatically, influence our morality. But most deeply, what is it about? It's about how much we want there to be of human beings. How much we want there to be of human beings. So,
Galatians chapter 1, always a great place to start. But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, the Apostle Paul says, let him, the messenger, be accursed. As we said before, so say I now again, if any man preach any other gospel unto you than that which ye have received, let him be accursed. Not only is the false gospel accursed, but the messenger is accursed. Peter warns of this in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1. We see his stern warning to the church that in their midst there be false teaching and false teachers. The Apostle Paul warns the Ephesian elders as he's ready to sail away from them, never to see them again, that in their very midst, from the men he was speaking to that day, from the Ephesian elders themselves would become false teachers. They would rise up to draw people after themselves. And Jesus warns us an astounding 14 times in the four Gospels to look out for false teaching and false teachers. It is westernized Eastern mysticism and thought. It is packaged in such a way that people in Western culture would accept it. It's not taught to us by a fellow with a turban or a squeaky voice and an Eastern accent. It is taught by college professors in business classes today. It's a spiritual experience without the cost of repenting of your sin. And it is humanism plus a spiritual contingent that equals the New Age movement. The emergent church movement is without any exaggeration the redefinition of Christianity. It is the new liberalism, and that's not overblowing the problem by any means. The emergent church leaders have decided that classical, historical, and biblical Christianity doesn't fit into the modern world, and thus they have elected to use the shell of Christianity, but not the truth of Christianity. So we've got to be careful, because just like in the cults, they use words that we think we know what the words mean, but they have radically redefined the words. In fact, some of I almost said New Age, some of the emergent leaders are even saying that we have never understood the words that the teaching from the Bible is taken from, and thus they've now redefined the teaching from the Bible conveniently. This is exactly what cult leaders have done since the inception of Christianity. Well.